So after the events of 9/11, I was furloughed in October, and I made it back to Portland. And in December of 2001, I was up on top of Mount Tabor, which is about 10 blocks from where I was living in Portland. And Mount Tabor is an extinct volcano, but at the top of Mount Tabor there is a park. And on a foggy morning or a misty morning, these trees are right at the top of the park. They're very mystical trees. I don't know who planted them or why, but they're planted in a circle, kind of. And when the mist is right, the trees really become very ethereal. But this is a photographer's dream. I had my Pentax LX with me and the 20 millimeter, and I got down under the trees. This was Agfa APX 25, which is no longer made. That was the film, and then I processed it in Rodenstock 1:100 for 20 minutes. And it's been one of my most popular shots. People say they see praying hands in it. I don't know if I see that, but I definitely see a face in one of the trees. So it's been a wonderful shot and one of my favorite photographs of all time, really. And even after 22, 23 years, I still enjoy looking at it. And I have a couple of prints of this hanging in my house to this day, actually. In the early 1990s, I was photographing weddings. That's how I was making my living. And I used a Pentax 645 kit to photograph those weddings. I had two bodies and, the 35, 45, 55, 75, 150. I believe I had the 250 or the 200, whatever it was. What I would do is on the weekdays, I would use my wedding kit, my medium format wedding kit 645 Pentax, to go photograph landscapes for my own personal pleasure, and because that's what I really wanted to do. And this was one of those shots. I think I took this in 1993 or 1994, and it had snowed. It just snowed. I believe it was in November, and I drove up to Larch Mountain, and this was the view from Larch Mountain. There's an overlook up there. And I really enjoy this photograph. I really enjoyed making it. I remember the day absolutely clearly. There was no wind. The sun was out. It was after the snowstorm. The only thing is I didn't quite nail the exposure. At that time, I wasn't so savvy to the zone system and exactly how to expose these kinds of things. I kind of let the camera do it. And the highlights and the trees in the foreground are slightly overexposed. But other than that, I think it turned out pretty good, and it prints really well in the darkroom. So that's one of my favorite prints as well, as are all of these that I'm showing you. So Mount Hood from Larch Mountain, I believe it was 1993. And film-wise, it was probably T-Max 100, because that's what I was using at the time. And developed in D76 1:1, 11 minutes, I believe. This photograph is called River Rocks, Ponytail Falls, Oregon, in the Columbia River Gorge. And right in the top right section behind that boulder, that's the Ponytail Falls coming down. And this is an incredibly sharp photograph. This was T-Max 100. Again, on the Pentax 645 while I was moonlighting as a landscape photographer while I was photographing the weddings. And again, this was in the early 90s. I just, every time, in some ways, the front rock in the front looks like a big potato, but the sharpness and the texture on the rock is just incredible, particularly for 645 medium format. So that Pentax system was really quite amazing. And this was a photograph that I've printed in the darkroom with great success. Turned out kind of how I wanted it to. The tonality in the water and the exposure were absolutely bang on. So definitely a successful photograph in that regard. And again, the Pentax 645, this is the Ponytail Falls, except this is in winter. And in the early season in November, when the snow first hits the gorge, it's still relatively accessible. and you can still hike the trails. And this was exactly what happened. There was a snowfall, and I zipped up the gorge one still Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday morning for some reason. And parked in the parking lot, hiked up to Ponytail Falls, and this was the scene that greeted me. And after the snowstorms, things tend to be very still, and the photography at that moment is really fantastic. So again, I believe this was T-Max 100 again, and the Pentax 645 kit in the mid-90s while I was doing the wedding photography. This was me doing the side work of the landscape photography that I wanted to do. So Ponytail Falls is quite a beautiful place to photograph. I have another photograph from there with these flowers that come out, but they only come out like for a week, and they're only out like in the first week of June, and I don't even know if they're still there. The last time I photographed them was, it had to have been 15, 20 years ago. So everything changes, and it's pretty amazing. So I'm not even sure if Ponytail Falls looks like this anymore. I mean, heck, that was, 30 years ago. So, but the Pentax 645 kit, I'll say it again, the lenses were marvelous, and even without mirror lockup, the system was sharp. I don't know what Pentax did to make that mirror go up without much vibration, but it definitely worked, because definitely got sharp images from that camera. And one last Pentax 645 image, I promise, from the same time frame, mid-1990s, early 1990s. This is Ramona Falls on Mount Hood, and it's quite the hike in there, not too bad. And the falls is just this, as you can see, really wide falls with a lot of cascades, and this extremely beautiful falls, but very difficult to photograph. And it tends to get clogged up with a lot of trees and things down at the bottom. And again, this was 30 years ago, so I have no idea what Ramona Falls looks like today. But it was quite fun. I actually I had hiked in there 2 or 3 times and wasn't happy with any of the compositions that I got. Conditions weren't right, sunlight wasn't right, etc., etc. And on this occasion, I happened to have gotten it. And so I wasn't thrilled with the photograph. It wasn't exactly what I had envisioned, but considering how much effort I put into it, I think it turned out okay. And it may not be what I envisioned, but I think it's a good photograph. This was definitely T-Max, I remember that, and it was D76 1:1, 11 minutes, which is my normal development. For medium format images, particularly with the 645 and with the 6.7, I still do that today. I tend to, instead of compensating in the development, I tend to bracket my exposures. And so that usually gives me a negative that I can work with and has a full tonal range. I keep my development constant, and I bracket the exposures with medium format. This is one of my oldest photographs that I have in my collection. This was like 1992 or 1991 when I first got to Portland. And it was a calm, still night. I remember it was very quiet night. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And I have a feeling, this was taken from the Broadway Bridge. I have a feeling if you tried to do this today, you'd be taking your life in your hands. Because Portland has clearly not maintained its small town peaceful atmosphere, and that's saying something. So yeah, and you can't get this shot anymore anyway, because they did this big like the tracks all the way to the left are gone, and there's a big walkway to some apartment buildings that they built, and it just doesn't exist anymore. But this is Union Station at night, and this was with an old Hasselblad 500C, with an old with an old 80mm C lens that I picked up very inexpensively. The camera itself was probably a mid-60s camera, and I mean, when I first moved to Portland, I had no money. I was so broke, but that was the best I could do at the time. And this was T-Max 100. I remember that as well. And again, D76 1:1, 11 minutes. That's typically what I do. But very nostalgic photograph. Not possible to get it anymore. The city has changed. And I really enjoy it. It has a very 1940s look to it, except for the skyscraper in the background. And one last image. This is in the city, is what I call it. This was 1993, and I was going out to dinner with a couple of friends, and I decided to bring my camera with me because I had just gotten a new camera. I believe it was a Pentax MX, and I had a 100mm lens. I remember it was a 100mm Pentax lens. I think it was the 2.8 or whatever their 100mm lens is. And that's all I brought with me, which was kind of crazy. Luckily, I had loaded Tri-X, which was 400 speed film, and no tripod, and I'm just walking along the street headed to the restaurant in this direction, and I don't know, I just brought it was at twilight, but it was dark, and I just brought the camera up to eye level and quickly metered in the shot, and I think I exposed a little bit for the highlights and just cracked off a couple of frames, and this was what the result was, which technically, I mean, this photograph shouldn't even exist. It shouldn't be any good at all, you know, but it was sharp enough, and it I believe it was a 30th of a second is what I was able to pull off, or a 60th of a second with a 100mm lens, f2.8 with Tri-X, and it worked. It actually won some awards, which it's been one of my favorite photographs for a long time, which just kind of goes to show you, you know, it might not have been perfect technique, but if the composition's good and the light's right, it's a good photograph. So it's one of the ones that I've really enjoyed, and I have a copy of this hanging on my wall as well. So in the city.